There is a story that when Enzo Ferrari, yes, that Ferrari, first saw the Jaguar E-Type at the Geneva Auto Show in 1961, he called it the most beautiful car in the world. When Frank Sinatra saw it, he is reported to have said, "I want that car and I want it now."
Jaguar's one of the most iconic British brands to ever exist in the car world.
This is what Jaguar once was, a maker of some of the most desired and admired cars on the planet. Today, however, the story has drastically changed.
The brand was diluted, the brand equity had been reduced, and the vehicles certainly weren't making any profits at all in the past few years.
It's been somewhat sad to watch the brand struggle increasingly over the last few decades.
As of November 2024, the company has almost completely shut down production and plans to keep it that way for more than a year. This is a move unheard of in the automotive industry.
So they're going to kind of disappear in the automotive world effectively.
But Jaguar says this is not the end. The once iconic brand is planning a comeback.
What we want to do is...
I'm curious if they're going to do something like they did with, not a car, but I think like Twinkies did this, if I'm not mistaken. They were a very recognizable brand, and basically they started to lose, I think, market share over time. And so I think there was like that big announcement of how like they were going to stop making them, and then it created all this buzz, and then people started to buy them again, and then they kind of came back. I'm curious if they're going to try to do something here as well of that similar sentiment of like sort of teasing the idea of them not existing, and then this kind of like forces their customer base to kind of come in and get more of these cars and get more attention for them. I know for some longer standing businesses and brands, you do have the problem of, because you've been around for so long and you're so readily available, that people stop trying to get those products because there isn't like that scarcity portion in there. Nobody's really worried about getting those. At least that's what happened to the Twinkie, I think, back in the day. And so maybe they're going to try something similar where like they just shut down production for a bit. This will force scarcity and drop down supply, and then hopefully that will proportionally increase demand for their vehicles, and then maybe even create sort of this like sense of scarcity that will then drive future sales. But we'll see what they have to share on that.
They take us back to the natural habitat by making breathtaking vehicles that really resonate at an emotional level with their clients.
They believe this vehicle is capable of reinvigorating the brand for the future.
But this production shutdown is just the first of several risky moves.
There are going to be serious consequences. This is going to be a hard one to back out of if they go down this route.
Also, broadly speaking, I feel like we have covered a number of videos on automotive manufacturers and brands. Maybe this is a post-pandemic issue that is especially happening. Maybe the combination of all those fluctuating prices in COVID times. I wouldn't be surprised if people sought alternative methods of transportation during that time, like leaning in more towards public transportation or other alternatives, or potentially like sharing vehicles where appropriate, especially due to those prices getting so exorbitant. Obviously, some people probably had to make do with less. And also, Jaguar itself is certainly a luxury brand as far as I can tell. And so that would also likely be hurt when the economy is not as great for the average consumer. So maybe this is an issue that is springing up around this time, or also it could have to do with like gas and fuel types versus like electric vehicles. That could also be a number of factors that are impacting the automotive industry at this point in time and their future projections and their current revenue.
In May 2024, Jaguar halted production on all the models it makes in its own factories, except for the F-Pace, a mid-sized SUV. Jaguar contracts the manufacture of two of its vehicles, the compact E-Pace SUV and the I-Pace EV, to the manufacturer Magna Steyr. Production on those vehicles will end in December. It stopped selling cars in the UK, its home country, except for those currently in stock. The move comes in the wake of years of sales declines. In 2017, JLR, Jaguar's parent, hit an annual sales record. Though that was largely thanks to the success of Land Rover, Jaguar's sales hit 178,601 units, a 20% increase over the previous year. They hit an all-time high in 2018 thanks to the E-Pace and strong sales of the I-Pace EV. Then things started to slip. By 2023, Jaguar was selling about a third of what it had been in 2017.
And really, the volumes then started slipping off. In 2019, the company overall, Jaguar Land Rover, has made a huge loss of over £3 billion. And included within that was a huge asset write-down for the lost volumes on Jaguar vehicles. And Jaguar never really recovered from that period.
Today, JLR, which has shortened its name from Jaguar Land Rover, is doing quite well. Once again, that's really thanks to its 3 lines of muscular SUVs: Range Rovers, Defenders, and Discoveries. It pulled in profits of over $2 billion in the last fiscal year, and in the first half of this year, $1.3 billion, a 25% increase over the same period a year ago. Just 5 years earlier, JLR was posting an annual loss of about $450 million.
Profits are back to the Hallison days.
Jaguar has released one EV. The I-Pace came out in 2018. It was the first legacy premium brand to release a fully electric vehicle. The I-Pace was a critical success. Among other honors, it swept the awards at the New York Auto Show. But despite an early surge of interest and large fleet purchases from Google's self-driving arm Waymo, sales of the I-Pace slowed. The company canceled plans to develop 2 more EVs, an electric version of its XJ sedan and a full-size SUV called the J-Pace. But it canceled both in 2021, when JLR first announced its Reimagine strategy, which included the plan to turn Jaguar into a high-end, low-volume EV maker. As of 2024, the I-Pace is still Jaguar's only EV. It never received any major updates or refreshes and was one of the vehicles Jaguar has discontinued. Industry analysts and former insiders say the problem for both its EVs and the larger brand is that Jaguar has lost its identity chasing customers and trying to adapt to the times. The production halt, which is so far planned until at least 2025, is meant to give the brand a chance to return to its original ideals. Make truly compelling, quintessentially British sports cars that look and drive like nothing else.
You've got to be different. You've got to be distinctive to do what they're trying to do.
Jaguar originated with the Swallow Sidecar Company in 1922, but the first true Jaguar was made in 1935. As with many brands, Jaguar had a key figure who drove its early success: founder Sir William Lyons.
Sir William Lyons had this idea about grace, pace, and space. He had another expression that he used, which JLR are using a lot now. It's called a copy of nothing. And that's really important. So he really believed he was copying no one.
These principles produced some incredible cars. Then came the E-Type, the car Enzo Ferrari allegedly gushed over in 1961.
There was nothing else on the planet that looked like that. To have the courage and the conviction to say, actually, this is what we think a sports car should look like, that's the essence of Jaguar.
I think Jaguar's kind of unique proposition throughout its history was its combination of driving dynamics and styling.
In these early years, Jaguar excelled in racing, winning the famous 24 Hours of Le Mans race 7 times since it had begun competing in the 1950s.
Here's Hamilton and the victorious Jaguar.
That put it just behind Porsche, Audi, and Ferrari. In 1948, it had the fastest production car in the world. But as the Lions years drew to a close, the company started to stumble. Like many small automakers, Jaguar changed hands several times.
Jaguar is another British brand, like so many British brands. Aston Martin is, but the two are kind of similar in so many ways. And that includes this struggle to find economic viability, to have this brand that's super well-known and powerful and desirable, and turn that into a business case that is profitable.
Yeah, this does seem to be, in particular, a struggle for these luxury car makers. I can't imagine too many people at this point in time are thinking about luxury car purchases. Again, just considering inflation, broader economic challenges that are occurring. I think this is something where many businesses are starting to feel like they're getting stretched a little thinner. And the general way that this works in an economic downturn is that usually people start to spend less on luxury items first and foremost. Because obviously, if you have a set budget and you're going to start to pay the most important things first, like your housing, your groceries, health insurance, healthcare, that type of stuff. And then like entertainment and luxury things are going to be all the way at the bottom of that list. And so that's where usually that spending increases when times are good and there's a lot of money flowing around. And then usually there are cutbacks when times aren't as good. So this is likely demonstrating how impacted the average American is on their finances at this point in time. And that this is slowly creeping into businesses that target higher price point merchandise and products. And so this seems to be highly correlated here in my mind, where this is a luxury brand, they're seeing less sales, they're starting to struggle. There's so many other places people could be spending their money. And also, if you're going to spend a little extra on vehicle or something else, why would it be this car? And I, as an American, I don't really think about Jaguars all that much. Like, I think maybe even an Aston Martin might be much more prevalent if you're thinking about like a very high-end luxury vehicle, maybe like a Porsche or something like that. But very rarely do I hear like Jaguar being mentioned as one of those vehicles. So there's already so many luxury brands that exist in the automotive space, and if there's less purchasing in the luxury space already, you're definitely going to need something that differentiates you. Otherwise, you could fall behind as economics and the market gets worse over time.
In the late 1960s, the British Motor Corporation, which later became British Leyland, bought the brand.
So William Lyons was getting on in years and looking ahead to retirement. I think that's when some of the problems started with Jaguar. Without Sir William Lyons' personal guidance and instructions on how the company should be run, and particularly on design and development of vehicles.
No doubt there will be many takers for a prestige name like Jaguar.
In 1989, Ford Motor Company bought it and eventually housed it in a division called the Premier Auto Group, with a number of high-end brands Ford had bought over a several-year period, including Aston Martin, Volvo, and Land Rover.
Ford did a lot of really good things at Jaguar. They improved the manufacturing facilities. They put a lot of money into the product investment. They brought some guys over to help running the company under the Ford umbrella.
The idea: share parts across various brands while enjoying the profits that come with higher pricing. But the deal didn't quite live up to its promise.
And that got a lot of criticism in the motoring media for Jaguars coming off those Ford platforms. But the vehicles were very capable. They were competent cars.
You look at those vehicles from that time period, the S-Type, maybe felt more like rebatch Fords than actual Jaguars. When you are selling on fashion and style and brand, it is hard to deliver a product that maybe is, it feels very everyday.
They didn't seem to really benefit as much as we kind of hoped they might with that kind of infusion of capital that Ford was going to hopefully give them.
They also made choices that may have damaged Jaguar's image, specifically turning it into a high-volume producer.
Jaguar was never really a high-volume manufacturer. It was a producer of very distinctive, good-looking, high-performance sports cars and saloon cars.
No wonder Jaguar is an endangered species on Ford's dwindling list of luxury brands.
Jaguar was a very fashionable brand, and it's hard to keep that up over decades and decades, especially when you go the route of trying to chase more volume. And that's what every car company is tasked with, because at the end of the day, it's great to be cool, but if you're not selling very many cars, your business isn't good, when that's really what you're in business for.
They never made any money doing it, and it didn't help the brand at all. It weakened the brand significantly until we get to a point where we are the last few years.
This higher volume strategy continued under Jaguar's current owner, Tata Motors, a subsidiary of the vast Indian conglomerate which purchased Jaguar along with Land Rover in 2008. Since that acquisition, the two brands' fortunes have diverged.
If I look at its more recent history, it's pursued a strategy of volume over value. It's tried to play in that volume premium space, which is really dominated by manufacturing and purchasing economics. And we've had vehicles that have been really competent, critically acclaimed, but perhaps not unique enough to really compete in that very, very tough segment.
Starting in 2016, the company had tried to turn to SUVs to keep up with larger market shifts. At first, it worked. There was a mid-size F-Pace and a smaller E-Pace.
So those two SUVs, they were smart-looking vehicles, particularly the F-Pace, a very handsome car, sold very well.
But the brand suffered during the Dieselgate scandal that engulfed so many other automakers.
Jaguar tried to have basically Jaguar versions of Land Rover vehicles, share the costs across the two brands, all the things you would want to try to do in that circumstance. But I think at the end of the day, if you're an SUV shopper and you're thinking, well, I could get a Jaguar, I could get a Land Rover, well, which one do you want to more be seen in?
It also couldn't achieve the success in SUVs that other sporty luxury car makers such as BMW, Audi, and Porsche had managed.
Porsche successfully transferred the brand into an SUV brand, and I think they did it because they didn't lose their performance cars. Jaguar didn't successfully do is they went so heavy on SUVs and kind of, with the exception of the F-Type, walked away from their performance sporty coupe history. I think that hurt them.
Then there are the aforementioned EV efforts, the I-Pace, the canceled electric XJ, and so on.
I think the Jaguar I-Pace is an example of what happens when you cannot commit to a long-term product plan and then follow through on that and execute and keep updating the model. There just hasn't been enough improvement in the I-Pace.
Yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme in some of the automotive makers that they have mentioned in these types of segments that have been struggling recently, or especially those that don't seem to be taking the EV transition as well. Especially some companies like Tesla led the charge on it, and some companies basically held back on their investment into EVs. But obviously we're hitting a pretty peak time at this point where most of those subsidies and like tax credits, etc., at least in the US, are starting to whittle down. Because again, they basically made these incentives to promote electric vehicles when they were very expensive and they weren't that cost optimized for the general market. And so basically the government added subsidies and tax credits in order to help promote the purchasing of electric vehicles in order to help keep them a little bit more competitive. As those prices have come down and those vehicles have become more competitive naturally, the actual credits and the subsidies that they are giving are decreasing over time. And so that means if you didn't enter the EV market already, then the amount of difference that somebody's going to get from buying your EV today than they could have gotten like 5-10 years ago is going to be noticeably different. And you're more competing with the general market at this point in time and expected to have already started to make that transition because the government had incentivized early adoption, and now we're kind of getting into standard adoption at this point. And so likely over the next 5-10 years, this is going to be a very sizable portion of the market, especially with global warming being a larger concern and a lot of countries working towards pushing for things like electronic vehicles over standard gas vehicles for the environment purposes. And this is where if you as an automotive maker didn't invest heavily previously such that you're starting to get returns on that investment and like you're starting to push and actually get these properly integrated into your flows and into your products, then you're likely struggling right now if you're trying to come from behind with less of those incentives available to you today.
So, the plan now. Stop chasing volume and go up market.
What we need to do now, as I say, is to go back to, well, actually, when we were successful, when we made cars that were genuinely, that looked like nothing else on the road.
When Jaguar does return, it will be as a smaller maker of EVs that are expected to start somewhere around $125,000.
Wow, that's a pretty serious price point. I think while inflation is real, $125K for a car is outlandish to me. I think maybe each of you can share your thoughts on like what you think is reasonable for a price for a vehicle at this point in time. But for myself, that doesn't seem like that would make a lot of sense. You're getting into the ballpark of, while you probably can't get a house for this price, you're certainly getting a down payment for a house at this price, or a condo, or some type of living situation somewhere in the US. Even in the high cost of living areas, usually if you go out of the city a bit more and you look for something like a small condo or something like that, you're likely talking in the $500,000 to $1 million range for something that's kind of off the main road, and not in the center of where everything is. You can likely start to get into that category. And especially with things like first time home buyer incentives, you can sometimes put as low as like 3 or 5% down. So even if this was something along the lines of like 5%, then you're getting into the millions of dollars for what type of home you could be purchasing. And so this is certainly, I think, within the range of a down payment for a house, especially if you're a first-time home buyer. So I'm not really sure who would be buying this. I guess that is the entire point, is that they're trying to go for smaller volume, higher premiums. But this is such a large price that you're also reducing how much of the market could potentially afford one of these cars. Because at 125, you got to be a pretty well-off individual to be even considering a vehicle in that range. And likely you have a lot of other things already set up. I think even if you got that down a bit more, maybe you could get more buyers, like maybe into the 100K mark. But 125 is quite a bit. I think somewhat similar is this is starting to make me think of like Hermes or Hermes, depending on your pronunciation of it, the clothing luxury brand. And so they have very high luxury items that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So clearly there is a market that exists that people do this for, and having a lower supply will ensure that there's continued demand for those products, even at those high price points. And arguably you'd get more value out of a vehicle that can get you from your home to a job that can pay you money, as opposed to something like a purse, for instance, depending on your career, obviously. But they might be able to get folks who are doing this, but it seems like such a splurge. And also at this price point, you'd have to be asking yourself, like, why this car versus some other car? Like, why not a very fancy like Tesla or some other luxury brand? Why Jaguar at that point for an EV like SUV? So I guess we'll see where that goes. Maybe also being from the American side, since this is a UK brand, maybe there's a different perception there, and maybe this is a preferred brand at those locations, and maybe in Europe. Especially, I'm not sure how well perceived Tesla is there. I'm sure there is some favoritism for Tesla in America, since it is an American-based company and they started in California. And so maybe they have less of a brand niche in something like Europe or the UK, where this brand is. So maybe that's how they're going to play it, but that seems very high in my opinion, and I don't know if I'll ever be buying a car at this price. Certainly not in anything inflation adjusted. Maybe inflation goes so crazy that in 20, 30 years, this is Honda Civic is 125, but that seems unlikely to me.
A price band just above where Range Rover models currently start. It expects to invest about $19 billion in the transition through 2028. The first of 3 new fully electric vehicles, set to launch in 2026, will be a Grand Tourer, basically a larger car that combines speed and comfort. Jaguar says it will be able to travel about 430 miles on a single charge. Tennant says to expect it will have about 600 horsepower and all-wheel drive. A concept car the GT will be based on was revealed at Miami Art Week on December 2nd.
We have a track record, I think, of bringing concept cars that are very, very close to the production reality. And I'm really confident that in the back end of 25, when we unveil the four-door GT to everybody, they're not going to be disappointed.
In late November, Jaguar revealed its new brands, emblems, and branding strategy. The campaign did receive some backlash.
I'm not sure I know what's going on in this ad.
The stock went down. The stock went down.
Elon Musk, we should mention, taking a jab at the ad, posting, "Do you sell cars?" ?
The eyes of the world are upon us at this point in time, which is exactly what we wanted when we come to unveil our vehicle. And so in that sense, we have everybody's attention. And I think for me, it's fantastic we can now actually talk about the vehicle.
So this Jaguar has got to have a jaw-dropping wow factor to it. And remember, Sir William Lyons, it's got to be a copy of nothing.
Jaguar does have some of the assets needed to make this happen.
That still has such great brand recognition and identity, even though it has gone through a period where it feels very watered down. People still, I think, have very positive emotions toward the brand, and they think that it is still aspirational.
Being a segment of Tata Motors, it has also benefited from the engineering capabilities of Tata Consulting Services, which helped design the dedicated Jaguar electric architecture platform the new cars will sit on. But there are some hurdles to clear.
I think most people will say on the negative side, oh, they cost a lot to repair, they've had reliability issues.
We have seen significant reductions in vehicle quality issues. We've seen that reflected in our overall warranty spend. But in terms of if we're going to operate at these elevated price points, quality is a table stake, and that's absolutely understood. We are absolutely embracing that challenge.
Yeah, why would you buy a luxury car for 100K plus and then have constant issues with it? And generally speaking, these cars are, as they had just mentioned, more expensive and costly to repair because usually like parts are rarer, they're not interacting with these vehicles as much, and they obviously know if you're willing to pay 100 plus K for this type of car, you probably have some extra money lying around, and people are going to charge a premium for those things. Especially when you can't rely on volume like you could for a higher quantity sale vehicle like a Honda Civic or like a Toyota Camry or something like that. And so definitely quality needs to be high end. I think this is a real big issue where I think especially like in COVID times, this happened to a lot of companies where, especially if they were kind of on the higher end, and especially with like inflation kicking in, they just saw everybody increasing prices, including the cheaper options in their space, and they were like, all right, if they can increase prices by 10, 15, 20%, like let's do it too. And they seem to have also cut costs on like how high quality that is. But who wants to spend 6 figures on something that is going to start breaking down on a pretty regular basis? And this, again, seems to be a pretty prevalent story that I feel like we're hearing nowadays from kind of the outset of COVID, and how companies seem to have been kind of taking advantage of the consumer base over the last few years with all those like supply chain issues, etc. And they basically rested on their laurels, tried to price gouge as much as possible, and in many cases gave a worse product for that price. And now they're kind of feeling the ramifications of those choices because, again, these things aren't going to happen right away. And I think this is where, as a business owner, you have to start thinking about the long term in many cases, because anybody can try to seek short-term gains, but then you damage your brand, you damage the product, you damage the trust that you have, you lose customers, and that's really going to set you down a path that isn't going to be great for you. And I think that's where a number of companies seem to be hitting that segment right now as inflation is increasing, as folks are looking and being more strict with their dollars and where they're spending.
It's profitable without Jaguar sales at the moment, so they're not trying to bet the company on this new car. They're probably betting their reputation on the new car, which is a different thing.
That JLR is thriving without Jaguar gives it the cushion to launch what many say is a risky endeavor. Among the challenges: 1. The higher-end EV space is becoming increasingly crowded. Bentley is moving into EVs. Rolls-Royce and Aston Martin are too, even Cadillac with the Celestiq.
I don't know how big the super wealthy electric vehicle market is, but it better be very big because there's a lot of automakers who have decided that's where they're going to make their fortune.
And the big theme in EVs and cars in general over the last several years has been affordability.
There's more vehicles than there are consumers in that price range. And you look at what Lucid's doing, or even, GMC Hummer, all of these very expensive electric vehicles. It seems like it's over catering to a small market.
We think there's definitely a white space for us to operate, that it's at the top end of the real premium market and probably but slightly under the pure luxury players that are in the market. We think that's a place, and absolutely validated by all the research we've done on the designs and the vehicles that are coming, that says actually Jaguar can absolutely command the volume we require at that price point.
Brower has another reason for skepticism.
I'm not really a fan of electric vehicles in general. I think they have their applications where they make sense, but the idea that you're going to have a Jaguar-like experience which is all about emotion and fun and passion, whether it's the look, the sound, the driving dynamics, in an electric car, which is kind of the antithesis of that. There is no sound, there's no hydraulic assisted steering. Obviously, it's electric assisted steering. All the things that made Jaguar great, in my mind, are kind of neutralized in an electric car experience.
It is a jaw-dropping design, and I think when I've looked at the specifications for this vehicle, I think they're definitely going in the right place.
It will actually be our most powerful Jaguar ever. Importantly, it will absolutely drive like the very, very best Jaguar should drive. It should be an incredible touring vehicle to be in.
What they're doing is very brave. I mean, they could have said, okay, right, we're doing all right with Land Rover. Let's push on with the Land Rover 3 brands, Range Rover, Defender, Discovery. Let's not bother with Jaguar anymore, or let's even sell off Jaguar. They've decided not to do that.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.